Welcome to The Wealthy Healthy, the podcast and blog dedicated to inspiring better mental, physical, and financial health. I'm your host, Ricky Newton, and today's Financial Fridays episode will be a summary, deconstruction, and a little bit of commentary around the book, The Millionaire Fastlane by MJ DeMarco. If you haven't yet listened to episode 9 of the podcast where I discussed the 1996 book, The Millionaire Next Door, and assuming that you haven't read that book already, then I suggest pausing this episode and listening to that before you revisit this. The reason for that is that this episode is essentially the second in something of a three-part series that we're doing here on the podcast where we're breaking down two really different schools of thought on the subject of building wealth. And then the third part is going to basically be my own personal philosophy that tries to combine the strongest aspects of each of these approaches. So whether or not you're familiar with The Millionaire Next Door, it warrants a quick recap. Authors Stanley and Danko spent decades studying the habits of first-generation millionaires, and in their search, they found that the typical profile of such a person was largely consistent across the board. Pretty often immigrants, often entrepreneurs and business owners, and nearly always frugal in that they save a lot more than they spend, and they rarely live in big homes with luxury cars parked in the driveway. So, what does author MJ DeMarco, the author of The Millionaire Fastlane, think about the frugal and time-honored approach to wealth building that's highlighted in The Millionaire Next Door? Well, in short, he would undoubtedly use the words lame and boring. And with minimal love, he likes to call that the slow lane. He compares it to living a life of deferred enjoyment. To live like a peasant for 65 years and then you finally retire, you can enjoy your nest egg, but unfortunately you're too old and unhealthy and pathetic for any of it to matter anyway. Of course, he's intentionally, for effect, being a little overcritical when he says this, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing here, but amidst it all, he does give the method a little bit of its own merit by defining an even worse situation, which he feels most Americans are finding themselves. This path, far slower than the slow lane, is what MJ DeMarco refers to as the sidewalk, where people live paycheck to paycheck with no capacity for wealth building. Even an individual with high income and a lot of material possessions can be a sidewalker, as he or she is doing nothing to build actual wealth and is instead enslaved to their careers and likely to remain that way until the moment they die in order to keep up with whatever lifestyle they've created such that they are living paycheck to paycheck. So in DeMarco's eyes, those traveling the sidewalk are largely destined to stay there without huge change, just moving 3 miles an hour until they actually do make that effort to change. So perhaps at this point it's becoming kind of obvious what DeMarco's stance is, given my little description there as well as the title of the book itself. DeMarco advocates for taking the fast lane, in which one finds an avenue by which he or she is able to earn millions of dollars in one lump sum, and thus live both youthfully and in old age as a rich free spirit doing whatever you want. One of the things that he opens his book up with, he recalls a childhood experience in which he saw a young man walking toward a Lamborghini Countach, a car that DeMarco had idolized. He had posters of it in his room as a kid. And as young DeMarco walks up to this guy, he musters up the courage and asks the young man, "What do you do for a living?" And the man responds that he's an inventor. And before DeMarco could probe any further, the man drives away in his dream car. And this experience led DeMarco to studying people who were rich and living the rich lifestyle, but with no fame. He wasn't interested in anyone who got rich in old age or were rich from inheritances or who were rich from a platinum album or a box office movie hit. It would be about 10 years, though, before DeMarco would actually crack that code to wealth and begin driving the fast lane. And after tons and tons of failures, he finally does succeed. And I'll talk in a little bit about what he did. Nonetheless, though, it's clear throughout his book that DeMarco revels in his ultimate freedom. He never has to work for a paycheck again unless he wants to. He could just live out his days on a perennial vacation if he so pleases. Any days he doesn't spend as a motivational speaker, which is what he does with a lot of his time now, he just gets to enjoy his huge home in Phoenix, Arizona, and drive around in his own Lamborghini and counting the royalties from his popular book, which now I'm kind of recounting here. So, it almost sounds too good to be true, right? But the reality is that it's not. It's really difficult. DeMarco does a pretty good job of breaking down how difficult it is. I think he still underestimates it, and I'm going to get to that in a minute too. But he even has some reasonably profound commentary on how others view things like luck. And he describes it as like everything boils down to process and working smarter. But even with his efforts to highlight all this, again, he still underestimates, in my opinion, and in the opinions of a lot of people when you read reviews of this book, perhaps underestimates by a lot the odds of pulling off something similar to what DeMarco himself did. He's his own case study, so there's a ton of survivorship bias there, and there's certainly, but the reality is, again, there are a high enough number of similar examples in recent history to bring more merit to those concepts. I mean, I myself live in the Silicon Valley. I work in the tech industry, so I've had the chance to work in environments where any given conference room might be occupied by people whose combined annual earnings are in the tens of millions. In fact, a cousin of mine was an early commercial hire at a company that went on to become worth several $billion. Just this year, she announced her retirement. Somewhere in her 40s now, she's going to be departing from this 9-to-5 grind, which, by the way, in her case was actually more like the 5 to midnight grind, 7 days a week for over 20 years. So it's not dissimilar from what DeMarco would describe as the process that created events that others would perceive as luck. In a sense, yeah, my cousin was lucky to have landed in that job, but she still took that opportunity. And once in that opportunity, the opportunity was there in the first place because of how much time she'd already dedicated to her process. And once she was there, again, this was no 9 to 5. This is 5 to 12. So again, there are lots of examples of this in recent memory, lots of different, the CEO of any tech company in Silicon Valley probably has a similar story. You're probably looking at some young woman or man who started a company, and within a matter of 6 or 7 years, now they're in their mid-30s or something like that, and they're worth tens of millions of dollars if they were to sell their company or liquidate their stock. So again, not everyone's road is going to require that 5 to 12 grind 7 days a week, no matter what. That type of commitment and work ethic, it's not always going to be required. DeMarco's didn't require quite that much, but the point is that the fast lane is actually an attainable reality by a couple of different avenues. Of course, to DeMarco's point, quite often you don't actually get to see the hours and hours and hours of grueling work or the high stress and the high risk that's associated with many of these decisions, but nonetheless, again, an attainable reality. And that's the premise of the Millionaire Fastlane. You might sound like, or you might think rather that this sounds kind of like a get-rich-quick scheme. And in a way, the Fastlane is a get-rich-quick scheme. In that quick means 5 to 10 years instead of 40 years. And in that scheme isn't really referring to some single approach or some sketchy pyramid scheme or anything like that. Certainly not any particular product or approach that DeMarco himself sells. He doesn't actually really sell anything in his book as far as this goes. So nothing like that in terms of a get-rich-quick scheme. But DeMarco actually really criticizes those. So to kind of contrast that, like, he talks in the book about late night infomercials. Why are these late night infomercials selling some multi-step process to create wealth quickly and easily? And what he comments on is that these commercials are preying on those people who don't know better, and they're looking for something quick and easy. Why is it middle of the night? Why is it late at night? Because to him, there's no somebody who's actually trying to be on the fast lane and who's putting the time and the effort into building this empire. They're not sitting in front of the TV at 2 a.m. So how did DeMarco actually build his wealth? Let's get to that. First, he moved to Phoenix with $900. And he lived in a place so small that, in his words, he slept with the Pop-Tart crumbs from the kitchen because the bed was so close to the counter. Nonetheless, though, he felt for the first time free and powerful and rich because he was in control of chasing his own dream and his own path. And so it was a long road for him too, though. Several years of odd jobs, but along the way, reading books from the local library, tried his hand at making websites right around the uptick of the dot-com boom, and while working a job as a limo driver, he started to recognize a market need for travelers who wanted to book a limo in the city to which they were traveling. At the Phoenix Library, he read books every day about internet programming languages, web design, graphics, and copywriting, things that he did not have any formal training in, no education. He just tried to teach himself out of books at the library. At first, none of this made him any money. A company in Kansas, though, did see one of his websites and really loved the work and ended up hiring him to design their own website. Within a couple months, he was self-sufficient, paying his bills without his mom's help, without having to rely on temporary jobs, delivering flowers or pizza or anything like that. And as his own website grew, he started to make a little bit of money, but still not very much. Eventually, he realized that the volume of email inquiries that he was receiving could begin to get sold as leads. So he shifted his approach from selling ad space to lead generation. And this was during the late 90s when lead generation in the internet world was very nascent and very untapped. He was one of the earliest ones to really sell lead generation as a product or as a service. And with this approach, he nearly doubled his earnings month after month. So he started about $400 a month. More traffic, more money, more upkeep, more complaints to address, more fires to put out. He said a typical work week was at least 60 hours. His friends were out enjoying themselves, being young, and he spent his Saturday nights in his apartment alone writing code. But he felt fulfilled. In the year 2000, he received multiple offers for his website, and he sold it for $1.2 million, which is great, but anyone who's really done the math on these things, it's not infinite money by any stretch. So to kind of illustrate that point, what did DeMarco do with the money? He squandered it. In his own words, he completely squandered it. He bought an expensive sports car, made terrible investment decisions, forgot about taxes until it came time to pay those, and he had just enough money left by the end of it to buy back his company from the original owners who drove it into the ground as the tech bubble actually bursted. So he bought the website back for $250,000 and was essentially back to square one, owned very, very little in terms of actual wealth. With his website back in his hands, though, he toiled for a year and a half to take the website to the next level, and he succeeded in building what he fondly refers to as a money tree. He'd planted the seeds and watered the tree, and finally it would bear fruit every minute of every day of every week, basically regardless of whether or not he spent any time on it. He would profit $100,000 to $200,000 a month, just working a couple hours a week to keep the website going. And he no longer felt the need to sell his time for money. In 2007, he sold the company for what he implies, I believe, I don't even know if he says the exact amount, but it's about $7-8 million just based on a couple of the things that he says. And ever since then, he's been retired, living in a nice house, but living off of a smartly invested nest egg, despite his kind of shamelessly indulgent lifestyle as well. So keep in mind what I mentioned earlier in this episode as well. Despite highlighting how much work went into his achievement, DeMarco still really underestimates how difficult this is likely going to be to pull off, especially in today's market compared to the market of 10 or 20 years ago. In 1997, there was no hit show like Shark Tank and Dragon's Den showing entrepreneurs and investors making it big with their businesses. And even those shows do a pretty good job of hammering home the point that there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of ways to fail. And many of those business owners are coming on the show in the first place after years of losing money or stagnant growth. DeMarco totally overestimates the rates of success in entrepreneurship, in my opinion, and again, the opinions of others. He underestimates the potential damage also of failure because he basically pulled off the dream with one of the first business opportunities, one of the first attempts that he really committed to building. If you put everything into an idea and it tanks, you might not necessarily be in a great position to tee up to take a swing at something different for a second time, especially if you have a family. So as much fun as it is to think about and as accurate as DeMarco is in his assertion that one can become a young millionaire without athletic or musical talent, my own criticism, and again, criticisms of many people online, is that DeMarco's concept has much more potential for harm than it does an approach like the Millionaire Next Door. The Millionaire Next Door, it's definitely slower, but it's sort of safe and steady. It's almost the guaranteed way to become a millionaire in a sense, assuming that you make enough. But again, if you save more than you spend, you're gonna get there. In DeMarco's case, again, this is something that if you fail once and then you go back and you try to swing again and you fail again, what if you have a wife? What if you have a couple of kids? Or what if you've got a husband? Or, what if there's people that are relying on you to actually bring home some money to pay rent and keep food on the table? That's my personal criticism of this. But in any case, that caveat aside, there are, again, tons of stories like DeMarco's. Again, in the Silicon Valley, there's a new multimillionaire made every week under the age of 35, it seems. And taking this approach, though, the reality of this is that it has to be for you. If you're the type of person who finds the millionaire next door completely oppressive and boring compared to this Fastlane approach, if this really excites you, you really do have to assess yourself realistically first. Are you in a position to take this type of risk? Keep in mind, DeMarco, through all of this, was single, without children. Are you in the right place to pull off one of these ideas? Is this the right time to pull off one of these ideas? Keep in mind, DeMarco did all this during the dot-com boom, and he survived the bubble burst despite making terrible decisions. Are you capable and willing to forego enjoyment of anything, basically, for years to work weekends and nights toward your goal? Are you emotionally going to be able to handle the realities of funding your business on credit card debt? I don't personally know if any of those things apply to me. I like the ability I like being able to take a break at some point in the day. I like to enjoy my weekends. I'm not totally risk averse personally, but the idea of moving somewhere new with no money and taking on debt to try to tackle something, for me, it's a terrifying proposition. I personally wouldn't really take that risk. On maybe, 1 in 100 lives, I would do that. But again, that's just me. What DeMarco is saying in his book and what I've outlined here from the book is there's plenty of truth to it, and I can't act like it isn't all appealing. I think most people would agree that it would be pretty fun to live in whatever house you want, drive whatever car you want, to travel whenever you want, wherever you want, and you're never beholden to a schedule. You don't have a boss or an employer or really any job at all if you wanted. That could be fun for most people. And I don't necessarily mean all of those things would have to be lavish. I personally would be nervous driving an expensive car. This is a kind of a digression, but I would be nervous driving an expensive car, knowing it's going to get door dinged like any other car. It's going to be a target for break-ins and theft. I don't really like the idea of a huge house. I don't really want to clean it or pay someone to clean it or furnish it or design it. Those aren't hobbies for me. I'm generally bothered by inefficient use of space anyway. But again, that's just my personal thing. Point being here, you have to assess yourself. There's nothing wrong with wanting modesty, and I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with enjoying the finer things, so to speak. And at the end of the day, I can't deny that it would be very comfortable to chase anything that fulfilled me without a financial care in the world. And DeMarco's opinion is that you're better off working yourself into the ground to get rich young and then live rich forever compared to the alternative of chipping away at a 401k and cutting back on your Starbucks budget. But listen, if you're the type of person that values this Fastlane approach to wealth and to freedom above nearly all else, then perhaps this is actually going to be for you. The whole reason, though, that I wanted to present this idea is to pair it alongside my previous discussion of the millionaire next door. I wanted to provide anyone who's listening to this or reading this with two basically opposite and somewhat extreme, yet definitely achievable examples of reaching the exact same end goal of financial independence, or being a millionaire in this case, which is, in most cases, that's going to be somewhat comparable. Those who tuned in to episode 2 or episode 9 probably know my opinion on this. I believe with better health comes better wealth, and with better wealth comes even more good health, or at the very least, the capacity to maintain good health mentally and physically. I believe absolutely anybody can benefit from financial independence, whether that means saving $200,000 to live in an RV or saving $10 million to live in a mansion. Whatever life you can build that's going to bring you happiness, financial independence is a great way to alleviate some of the potential stressors that are imposing upon your ultimate happiness. Next Financial Friday, I'll be sharing something a little less detailed and technical and a little more personal. I'm going to talk about my own personal combination of the Millionaire Next Door and the Millionaire Fastlane, which I like to call the Next Door Fastlaner. I personally enjoy the overarching teachings of both of these books, but I'm a little too risk averse to drop everything and just go for it. But at the same time, I'm not going to close myself off to potential opportunities to fall into the Fastlane in a way that feels more comfortable and responsible for my own lifestyle. As such, again, I sought to kind of design a strategy for myself that incorporates elements of both. Again, that's what we're going to talk about in next Financial Friday episode. All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in. As always, feel free to share your thoughts, your praise, your criticism. It all serves to make the show better. And of course, be sure to check out the blog and other content on thewealthyhealthy.co and subscribe to whichever medium you prefer. Later.